My name's Irene, I'm from WA. Rhonda, I'd like to ask, we've heard a lot about how a provider and our staff feel about consumer-directed care, but give us your perspective of what you think the consumer feels about it, and do they actually really know what we're talking about, or is it just us that's got this scare rather than them?
Well, I think consumers definitely want consumer-directed care, although they may not call it that. So if we go back to 2011-12, when the then Minister for Ageing did his conversations across Australia following the release of the Productivity Commission report, consumers were very clear about what they wanted from aged care reform, and that included more choice and more control. They also had a number of things to say about workforce, and we haven't heard a lot today about the consumer perspective on workforce. The one comment I did hear was that consumer and providers' perspectives about what makes a good personal care assistant were very different, and so that's a bit of a challenge, I think, for the sector. But I think definitely what people are saying is they do want choice and control. They definitely want more information to make informed choices. What people want, I think, varies across people with different diverse needs. So when we talk to the COLD communities around consumer-directed care, they're talking a lot more about family participation. They think that CDC is a very Anglo-atomistic, individualistic concept, but it's about everyone being involved and the informal networks being involved in the care and directing how they want the person to be supported at home. The other thing that people say very strongly is they want to remain independent. They want people working with them, not doing for them. And they definitely want to stay at home. And to make decisions about how that's going to work for them.
Can I just add something to that?
Can I just interrupt for a moment? I've just been told, would you mind pressing a button on your microphone so that it works when you speak? There you go.
We're pressing. Okay, you can hear okay? Yeah. I think one of the things that's going to happen over the next 10, 20 years or so is that the people we've had coming through in the last 20 or 30 years have come from a generation where they've come through the Great Depression, they've come through the Second World War, they've been used to going without. The next group of people we're going to get into aged care are people who have come, the baby boomers, that come after the Second World War. They're used to more prosperous times, more choice, that they make more demands. Those are the people that will be coming to us as our next lot of clients. So consumer-directed care might be starting now, but as we go on over the next 10, 20 years, there's going to be a lot more demand, I think, placed on us as providers.
I would agree with that, although we say the consumer of the future is also the consumer of today, but maybe they're just not as vocal and assertive about it. I think the other thing about the current generation, as you describe them, is that they're probably a frugal generation, and I think what we're finding with CDC is that once the budgets are transparent, they're wondering where on earth all that money goes that doesn't go into their direct services. So I think from a provider perspective, we need to be very conscious about the level of your overheads and what your costings are. We're already hearing consumers going out and interviewing providers to work out who they want to use and comparing their schedules of cost and that sort of thing. While I have the microphone, can I do a quick ad break? Just put on your tables some information about home care today, which is the CODA project, helping both consumers and providers to get ready for CDC. And on the consumer side, we're producing information and also peer education for consumers, so that will start rolling out in May. There's probably not enough for everyone there, my apologies, but I've got a few more here if you really desperately want one. Thank you.
Have you ever done a survey of the consumer to find out what they want?
Absolutely. So that when I mentioned the minister's conversations, I think there were about 3,500 people that were involved in those, and that information was summarised, as well as about 85 submissions from consumers that went to the Productivity Commission. And that analysis came out with very clear themes and a lot of commonality there.
Hi, my name's Robin Simpson. I'm from Frontier Services in the Non-Territory. And I'm just wondering how all of you see consumer-directed care working at a place like Docker River, which is 9 hours from Alice Springs.
Mm-hmm.
And we only have one service provider.
I think that probably in terms of flexibility and responsiveness to local needs, that Indigenous services have been doing that for an awful long time. I don't know if you're aware of the Choices project. Yeah, so there have been projects having a look at involving Indigenous elders in designing a CDC approach for Indigenous communities. And so they very much had input to what that might look like. Certainly in all remote areas there will be limitations on the choices, so it's more about how do you get flexibility within what you've got available than giving people a whole range of choices. But it's also about people understanding a bit more about how the system works and how we can provide information that's clear and understandable to people to say, well, this is what's available, this is what your budget is, and talking to them about their needs, their preferences, both their individual characteristics and the cultural characteristics that are important to them, and how you might address those within the package.
My question is to both Rhonda and David. We hear a lot about CDC being choice, which is ideal, aspirational for consumers. We have a workforce that is heavily regulated by the Fair Work Act, by the Occupational Health and Safety and so on. I'm a consumer, I want to shower at 11 o'clock at night. It's going to cost me double because of penalties and on costs and so on. So are we being realistic about choice is limited because of the rigidities in our workforce by regulation?
Good question, but I'll take a different approach to it in terms of workforce planning and not speak specifically about workforce planning, but talk about industry compliance and industry regulation per se. I think your question's no different from when do I get the electrician out, when do I get the plumber out, when do I get those sorts of things that suit me as the consumer but don't suit the provider or the vendor. And this is what we're really talking about. We are talking about a customer-provider relationship, regardless of the product or the service that we deliver in this room. We're struggling to get our head around that in terms of the availability of staff. We certainly have as our core value providing what the customer wants when they want in the manner they want. But the paradigm has to be, for us, by keeping our employees safe. So I think you have to work within those regulations and do the best you can. You are constrained, there's no two ways about that, but I think you can be innovative, and I think it's a matter of discussion, consultation, and negotiation. And I think that's probably where we're at the moment. The reality is I don't think we'll really unpack this, and perhaps this is where the WIN network can be really informative over time, is where those little innovative golden nuggets that are occurring out in little areas where people come up with some really good ideas that you can socialise across the industry and take them and run with them.
I think, any part of anyone's life is always a matter of negotiation. Living in a family, you can't always have what you want. You're part of negotiation. So I think we need to be realistic about CDC, that in fact the important part is the relationship between the provider and the person, and the ability to have those open conversations around what are the constraints, how might we bend over backwards as far as it is possible to address your preferred lifestyle and the things that you want. But in the end, yes, there will always be constraints. Both parties have both rights and responsibilities, and we do need to keep workers safe. Having said that, I'm hearing some things from some of the work health and safety authorities that are a bit over the top. And we've got a project actually looking at all the legal issues that come up from delivering CDC and looking at whether there are some alternative models. There are some that have been used in the disability area, sort of positive risk-taking approaches, shared decision-making, shared risk models that might be more appropriate in a CDC environment than our current sort of approach to risk management. That's a much longer term project. So in the meantime, we work within the constraints that we have. But I think there needs to be a conversation, both across the NDIS and CDC around how all of those regulatory mechanisms work together to deliver on, a reasonable capacity for people to make choices and take risks.
Yeah, I've got a question for Justin about collaboration. My name's Jenny Allen from ADSI Home Living Australia on the Central Coast. The government is obviously pushing service providers for more collaboration and partnerships. We're also operating in a more competitive environment. I just wondered if you could share some experiences or some principles about the challenges in that.
I think the challenge is, pardon me, is not to look at it as I think we've moved a long way from whenever I'm in the past spoke about collaboration, there was always merge seemed to follow it behind there. I don't think we're at that point. I think we've actually moved past that, and the providers that are going to merge have pretty much done that. If they haven't, they're very close to it now. I think the providers that are still around now are broadening their horizons to look at how can I tap into who else is in the industry. I use my project as an example. Myself and Peter McCloskey from Community Care Services Central Coast, we got together about probably 18 months ago now, both providing same sorts of services, both at opposite ends of the coast. It started as look, can you do this for us? We'll try this. We've now merged that into a completely new business. And I think each provider needs to do that, needs to have a look outside the square. The jury's still out of whether that business is going to work or not. We use the WID money to get some business plans drawn up. We've got marketing plans for the next 3 years and those sort of things. But we still don't know if that's going to work, but we know that that's the direction that we need to head in, and that's what's going to be best for us. It's really important as a small provider. We've got 76 beds, so we're only very small, but there's a lot of competition in our area. But we can all survive, and I think that's the key, is work out who your partners are and what you can each get out of each other. Because, in our area there's lots of organisations offering something similar, but someone's always doing it better than someone else, so pick their brains and take the best you can from someone else. I know certainly in our project that's what we've done. My organisation has strengths, so does Peter's organisation, and we're using that to work quite well together. So I think that the trick is to really look at, who your competition is, can you work with them? Because I think, whilst we are in that competitive market, it is going to open right up in terms of we are all going to be competing for the same dollar. It's looking at what your real strengths are and focusing on them and using someone else's to prop your business up.
My name's Fran from the Health Services Union. I think my question's to Rhonda, but to any of you. We already have concerns about the ACFI being the funding model for aged care, and what our members tell us, that they worry that residents are actually de-skilled to ensure that money comes in. So, people could walk to the bathroom, but they're actually put in a wheelchair because it saves time, saves staff, and it actually brings money in. Same with eating, combing hair, those sorts of things. What our worry is that this funding model is going to go out to the community, to the home care package, and that's going to be even harder in some levels. So people stay at home to be independent, but if this is going to be the funding model, it's a worry.
I think, just putting on my NACA aged care reform hat now, that I'm not sure that ACFI is going to end up as the funding model for community, and in fact there's been quite a lot of movement on the assessment front, with the gateway and the assessment functions around moving much more. It started as very much a deficit-based assessment model. It's moved a lot more now to a restorative-based assessment model. And much more of face-to-face assessment rather than telephone assessment. So I think the direction is moving away from that in community. I think there probably will still be refinement to the community care funding model, but I think there's enough sense of the issues that you're talking about not to go in that direction, and certainly NACA would be very strongly opposing that in the future.
add a comment to that. In a provider, like from the 1st of July, with all the changes coming with RADs and DAPs and everything else, consumers will have that choice. If they go to a facility that's doing that and taking that away from them, they'll have the choice to go somewhere else. So they will actually be able to go, I'm going to go here. So I think if there is providers out there doing it, I think over the next 12, 18 months, 2 years, you'll see that that will drop dramatically because they won't have bums in beds. They have bums in beds and they keep the doors open. So.
I guess that's sort of, I think one of the lacking things is that there is very little reward for good providers, and so there's no sort of incentive there. If you are a good provider, you're treated the same as the bad providers. People have been around for a long time talk about a previous funding model that did reward the good providers. I think that's missing.
I think we've been through, in my time in aged care, we've had PCAI, we've had RCS, we've had ACFI, we'll have another model, we'll have another model, we'll have another model. It seems to be every 10 years we seem to revisit a new model. I'm sure we'll do the same thing again. I just don't think there's a perfect answer to it.
I guess the other thing that will come into play is the development of the quality indicators that are going to go on the My Aged Care website. It's gone a little bit quiet just at the moment, but I think those quality indicators will be looking at things much more like that than, quality of life and those sort of approaches than, say, the accreditation kind of approach.
Gordon Duff from National Disability Services. You may know we're currently preparing advice to government in the form of a report around the National Disability Workforce Strategy, which we'll deliver to government by August. I would hate to think that the advice that we provide just ends up in the disability sector being more effective at predating on another sector's workforce. So I'm interested to hear from the panel about how the different subsectors within the Community Health and Industry Skills Council's remit, how we can work more effectively together and provide the kind of advice to government about a unified sector, kind of a health and community and care sector that's an industry of choice, a broader industry of choice, to deliver on the sort of social policy challenges and objectives that we all face.
You're asking me for a comment on an industry issue, and I'm a subsector of that industry. Rod Cook made a very good point last week at the Aged Care Workforce Strategy 2024 when he said we're effectively going to be robbing Peter to pay Paul in terms of trying to find good calibre staff. I think there is almost a desperate need for a consolidated approach to the industry, be it workforce planning, be it your competency framework, whatever it is that helps us do what we do. But I see disparate sectors or subsets of the industry not talking to each other. And we need to start talking. I'm not sure how we're going to do that. And in that comment, I mean both employers, employer associations, unions, all the stakeholders that are there. We need to have a decent conversation.
I just sort of add that today's been very positive, and the work that these guys have done is amazing for people just from outside to see what's going on. But it's happening in small clusters at 10 sites over Australia to people who are very driven and very skilled at what they do. But the wider community is still not aware that this stuff's going on just in our sector, never alone cross sector. So, the final report for this might be too late to endorse something that you do as well, I'm not sure. But more of the stuff that I've heard about today, I would believe across sector as well as within sector would assist.
Just from the very big picture perspective, this item is actually on the agenda for the National Aged Care Alliance meeting in May, and Ken's going to be speaking to aged care providers about what you've done in the disability sector. The Minister in his speech on Monday to CEDA actually said that he wants to see an integrated ageing disability workforce strategy. In the aged care space, there is a group, a National Aged Care Alliance subgroup looking at workforce development, but it is waiting on, the Minister has said he wants to do an audit of all the money that's gone out on workforce development in aged care before he takes the next step, and we are waiting on the department to provide us with that information about what are all the projects that have been funded under all the different portfolios and where are they all up to, before it's possible to actually look forward and say, well, where's it going to go to from here? So through your peak bodies, there is the opportunity to have input to that when that group or that group's established, but they've not yet met.
My question's for Raymond, because you've been sitting there so quietly. From a strategy and direction viewpoint, and following on from that particular question about collaborative workforce planning across the sectors, how important is it now to be looking at, from a strategy viewpoint, the capturing of that workforce capacity in a mixed mode of training and delivery?
That's a very good question. I come from a sector or an organisation that does have both disability and aged care. We use both aged care staff and disability staff. And from the work that we've been doing with our staff, we find there are common elements that are required over both sectors. However, what's happened in our industry is that we have formed these silos around each of these sectors and try to treat them differently. And that's one of the mindsets that we're going to have to change over the next couple of years, is saying that if you're in the aged care sector or if you're in the disability sector, it really doesn't matter. There are fundamentals that need to be trained to each and every single support worker, and then there will be some level of specialisation within that sector. Now, strategically, that allows for this flexibility that we're going to require in the sector in the long term. We've talked very quickly about, what do you do late at night? That's got to do with flexibility. But we need flexibility of staff being able to move around because of the staff shortages that we're going to see in the whole industry within the next few years. We did mention the baby boomers. We saw the graph of the baby boomers stepping off the one side of the scale to the other side of the scale, from workers to clients. That's going to hit us very strongly in the next few years. So we need to develop this flexible, multi-talented sort of skilled staff that can work in either aged care and or disability. And that's what we've got to do. And if you look at the competencies that they are being taught, they're largely very, very, very similar. So small degree of specialisation is what we will require in the future.
Do you think mental health hangs outside of that, or do you think that needs to be?
Again, mental health does not hang outside that. You've got your basics, but you do need a level of specialisation. So our organisation specialises in dementia care, and we found that that needs a very high level of specialisation. Mental health will have the same. My staff who work in disability can move into the dementia side quite quickly with the right mentoring, coaching and the inductions to keep them safe and to keep the client safe and make sure the level of service that we provide is maintained.
Yeah, just a question you mentioned before about the small scale of Victoria. Just wondering about your thoughts about how they can be made, those stories can be made more transparent really for the whole industry to be able to look and see what's happened, the learnings out of those, and is there any thoughts around how that might happen from an operational perspective?
I'm not sure it's a question each of the panellists can answer. I think that's almost a peak body type of question. I mean, thoughts that run through my head are, get onto your CEO, take out ads in the newspaper. Social media is a wonderful thing. Networking, I'm not sure what the future of the WIN Forum is. Perhaps it needs to be geared up in terms of funding. They're just some ideas, but I think the great shame will be if innovations such as these forums and the work that's been done in those regional areas is allowed to wither. And that's the one piece that you should take away and push back through your local members.
I asked a similar question when we were at the roundtable of ROD, of one of the studies that's been done by United Voice about how was that going to be promulgated. And my understanding is that once the final report is available, it will be made available through the Industry Skills Council or various other agencies. That Rod might be able to help us out.
Yeah, it's just, it strikes me that some of the work that the smaller organisations have done rurally in coordinating to provide some services in a coordinated way, those sort of stories may well be very useful for the rest of the industry to understand and know about. And granted that these sort of forums help to disseminate some of those sort of messages, but at the end of the day there's a limited number of people from the industry that can attend, and I just think one of the wins may well be that there is some kind of central place in which all of the stories can be told, and that the industry have access to them, and they may well use them, as instigators for some of their own projects.
Hello, Judy McKay, the Executive Officer of the Human Service Training Advisory Council from Darwin. I'm just interested to know the panel's thoughts. We're talking about, we know that we've probably got proposed changes coming to qualifications, so our staff will be multi-skilled and multi-talented and able to work across different areas. We're talking about the need to move out of our silos and to operate in more shared services. And I think we've been talking about that. I'd like to know your thoughts about what a collaborative model for working would look like in sharing across businesses.
I would probably ask him, what capacity do you mean? I think this is just so varied that there's so many different business opportunities, there's so many different. The impetus of many businesses might be to take on the challenge and build their own. Others might want to collaborate. Some might want to, put their hands up and get taken over by these big sharks circling around, But I think that there has been quite a few instances of organisations that are like-minded, willing to get together, where they can do some collaborative stuff that works really well. I know up in North Brisbane we've had a collaboration in a couple of different areas around allied health, around other community service stuff that has worked really well, and because the people at the table have bought into it and have gone into the right manner, they're like-minded, they're well respected, they understand what the end goal is, and it's happened really quite easily. I've also seen a couple that have fallen over badly because of one player really just wanted it their way or no way. Collaboration doesn't work, so I think it's really hard to say this would be a blueprint for something that would happen across the board, but I think that whoever sits at that table, the right people from the organisation need to be there with the right intent, and I think that it happens quite simply then. Well, more easily, not simply, more easily.
Can I just add to that, from a strategic point of view and from a governance point of view, that's where it all starts. It really starts with organisations' governing body. They've got to make that choice, and it's for CEOs, people like yourself around this table, to influence that in the right direction. We tend to forget that governance bodies are put in place to help us set the strategic direction, and one of the strategic initiatives is to maintain an organisation, make it sustainable and financially sound. And if we're going into a battle of I'm better than you and I'm going to steal your clients, I'm going to steal your staff, we're not going to focus in on delivering a great service to anyone. That's one of the things that I think the Mid-North Coast has been doing extremely well for a number of years. We have a collaborative approach to what we're doing, and from my own particular organisation, we've been able to move the board by working extremely hard with the board to understand that there's more to gain by collaborating, working in partnerships, working in alliances, than actually going into messy takeovers and stuff like that. And by broadening the base of our community focus, we can actually encourage communities to develop their own culture and maintain that feel, that own culture in the community, instead of allowing larger organisations to come in and dominate that culture and actually manipulate it to what they want. So one of the things that we're doing, which is is looking at how do we take the funding that we receive through the government and how do we rotate that through the community as many times as we can, instead of actually just paying it out to big providers. So how can I spend the dollar that I get from the government to deliver a respite effect? How do I go and actually spend it with another organisation that requires that, and to buy services from them, and they on-buy from another organisation and another organisation and another organisation. By doing that, we can take that $1 of government funding and we get a small multiplier effect. So the studies that I did in the Mid-North Coast, for every dollar you spend, say, at Coles, 45 cents remains in your community. If you go and spend it in a local organisation or that, 65 cents stays in your community. So it's pretty important that we understand that there's more to gain from a community point of view by working together. But it starts right at the top. And it's very interesting, we had good old Maverick and Goose, with Maverick at the back there in the green dress. We looked at the stats there, but we didn't delve into, and I'm sure we didn't have time to delve into those stats and look at the causative effect. Yeah, sorry, Gus, I missed you in the front there. Yeah, we didn't delve into the causative effects. We looked at the stats by itself, but if you look at where does all this stem? So where does the fact that we don't have a good workforce plan stem? And I'm going to propose it stems with bad governance. Because if we don't have good governance in our organisations, they're setting the direction of where we're going, and it undermines our whole sector.
I'll just add to that too. It was interesting with the when the slides were up before, that governance wasn't as high as an issue for most organisations, yet I know just in the conversations that I've had with people that a lot of people are saying I have issues at that point. So I think I think some of that comes back to when the report came back the first time, and I was guilty of this, looked at it and went, I can't give that to the board like that, we have to make some changes. So, and I think that's actually come out in some of those figures. So it's really important that the board do come along with you, again I use my experience. Is that we had two CEOs that were both on the same path, knew exactly where we're heading and know exactly what we want and how this collaboration will work. But certainly I would say our boards can't see exactly that at that point. So it's really important for us to drag them in with us and show them where we're heading. Yes, they're in charge of governance where we need to be, but sometimes as a CEO we've got to push them in that direction to say, well, you know what, you're saying there, you probably need to push it back this way because that's where we need to be.
Can I follow on from that? And can I ask a question around about, we're kind of talking about upskilling the workers and making sure leaders have the right competencies. Are the boards mature enough? So it's kind of following on, and if they are, how have they got there? And if they aren't, what are the kind of strategies that you guys as kind of senior leaders within the aged care sector have employed?
Can I just say, no, they're not mature enough. No, look, we have some really good boards out there, seriously, who work extremely, extremely hard. And I'm talking from the community sector point of view. Bearing in mind that a lot of the community organisations and the not-for-profits were developed from volunteers, and volunteers give up their time lovingly to a cause. But generally they're not skilled enough. So the starting point for these things is to set up your due processes and procedures and stuff like that. However, that's not good enough because they don't know how to do it. So you've got to invest time in teaching your boards what they have to do and that. And unfortunately, in some cases, you have to work on your board that certain people will exit, and you have to do targeted recruitment for your board. And that's probably the one thing that we don't do extremely well. When we recruit on the boards, we normally don't have a recruitment policy. I don't know how many boards out there actually have a board recruitment policy or a board replacement policy. It normally is, Johnny next door loves doing this, he'll come along on the board, or that. But if you look at the large organisations out there who are successful, or I'd hate to say BP is successful, but if you have a look at them, they recruit people on their skills and what they can bring into the organisation. And that's what we've got to do as a sector. Look at everybody who comes into our sector and look at them. How can we bring them in, and what do they bring to our sector? And for example, the board that I'm working with, we rotated it in the 2.5 years that I've been there twice. And we now have a working board that is exceptionally well skilled and well versed in what they have to do. And in that period of time, the organisation has doubled itself. So it's employed from 45 to 71, and it's doubled its revenue stream in a time when the government is slowing down the revenue streams. So how do you do it? You start at the top and work through the organisation.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to add any clarity, but just pick up on a few points before about the rural and remote and the after hours and the cross-sector stuff. Quite often, and it's really a challenge, this new direction, this new business that we're moving into around volunteer boards, marginalised boards, Indigenous populations about. It's great to say we need to recruit, get expertise and do whatever. Sometimes it's just not able to, So some of the challenges then, which also bring up what we were talking before about collaborating, getting together, and some networking at a higher level to provide support to those guys, because to me that challenge over the next few years for those guys is critical to the success of their organisations and then their communities and then their care, and at the bottom line challenges of being able to age in place, So.
I think governance is sometimes very undervalued in terms of its importance in organisations, and in terms of training, I think until very recently there wasn't a lot of tailored training for our sector. It's interesting, the AICD have just put out a set of community sector governance standards, and our community have just set up a program for not-for-profit governance. So I think it's being recognised now, but it's been quite a long time coming.
If I could make a couple of comments, I would suggest that the fact that you've got governance ranked so high on your list of pain points is a direct reflection on the competence and the capability of your board members, and I mean that in a respectful sense. I think the industry has changed in its dynamic and its complexity and what's required of board members. If you look at the projected growth and then you compare that to the size of industries in other industries and the revenue streams and the number of employees, and you look at the calibre of those organisations and their senior executives and their board members, we are a long way short. Our capability frameworks that we work on start at CEO if we're lucky and work down. We tend to ignore board members, and we need to focus in on them as well. It's from the very top to the very bottom.
So I would just agree with that. That's one of the things that we do miss out on the workforce development plan. We tend to start with the CEOs, but good organisations start with your board. They are part of the workforce. We tend to ignore them. We think they're outside the workforce. They are part of the workforce, and they need to be in that plan.
Yeah, I was just going to support what Raymond said, and we've just gone through this process ourselves of bringing external consultants in to help with our board to concentrate on governance and business ethics. At higher level, we've found that our board were very focused on day-to-day operational stuff. They were missing the big picture stuff. So we've been working hard with our board. We've also made some changes in the board, and again, to support what Raymond said, targeting specific people within our community that have got the skills that we needed within our board.
As a board member, and had been, his dad's here still, for 9 years actually, on a large aged care facility, a not-for-profit volunteer board that was one of the most highly skilled boards I've ever worked on. I'm actually on several boards, and have been. I have to say, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater in relation to the whole volunteer board members and paid board members. We had a 99% attendance rate with volunteer board members. I think the skill level that boards have, I agree with you, are diverse. What does need to happen is that boards actually need to share with other boards. I think that's what the significant issue is here, because I can tell you there's some very high level boards
in aged care organisations that learn constantly, that have absolutely been targeted for their skills, but I don't think they're very good at sharing at the moment. And I think that some of it is it business, or is it just that they're busy too? Because often your board members are busy. So I think that I absolutely agree with you, and it certainly has been a learning curve for the board that I've been on. But I can tell you it is a very high functioning board, and every member that's come on since has said exactly the same. They cannot believe at the level that this board works at in aged care. And they're people that are business people as well, so it's quite interesting. So I think we have to be really careful about our boards, because there are some very high level boards. What does need to happen is the sharing needs to happen between the boards.
Tis on. I turned it off. Can I add to that? And I thank you for saying that, because I sit on a board, and they're a fantastic board, and I was chosen because I had the skill mix at the time that they were looking for, rather than I just put my hand up. But I also work with an extremely proactive, young, dynamic, volunteer, not-for-profit group. And we have across a range, not just residential, community and retirement living. And they are fantastic. And they've been very visionary for a very long time. Your comment about boards having the opportunity to share, as part of our project, we ran a collaboration and partnering forum, which was for CEO and boards. And of the 55 attendees, 60% of those were board members. And they had robust, in-depth discussions at a strategic level, shared things, had innovation, saw board members who weren't really happy to be there at the beginning of the day, by lunchtime, facilitating workshop discussions around the table, which tells me that maybe we don't promote opportunities for board members to get together to do that blue sky thinking and sharing, which actually helps to cross-pollinate information and break down some of those things and perceptions that they might have about things. So thank you.
Where does the consumer perspective fit in best practice workforce development? Is it all about skills or also about values?
I think it depends on the level of sophistication of your workforce planning. I think if you haven't done any workforce planning or strategising, you need to start with the basics. You need to know your business, you need to know your people, and really only then can you actually start thinking about your external constituents, your customers. Clearly with consumer-directed care, there is a huge customer, can I call it sales focus, customer service. I think there is discussion and discourse about input from the consumer, but I don't think we've actually got our head around how we actually factor that in beyond, we need a competency on customer service at this stage. That would be my comment.
Can I just say that I think there are two ways of generating customer loyalty in CDC. One is to have good customer service, the other is to have consumer engagement in your organisation, because if you involve people in actually the design and the implementation and the evaluation of your CDC project, they're going to be loyal to your organisation as well.
I'd just really quickly like to add to that comment. We did actually, as part of the review, ask organisations about their vision and values, and part of that crossover and cross-sectioning of doing that was about how focused their actual values were and how much their actual staff bought into those values and understood those values. And I can tell you it was one of the top scorers. So in terms of that, we do feel that the industry is on track in understanding that their values have to match up with not only their service and their customer service and all those nice little new trinkets that are coming out of CDC, but it's also very much aligning themselves with their values. And I strongly would believe that from the results that we got, that the values of the organisations are mostly aligned to a consumer focused, and their staff are consumer focused. It's more about how the business context comes into that and not losing those values.
Can I just say something on that? In preparation for this session, I did a quick, what you do, Google search. And I downloaded a number of organisational strategic plans, starting in South Australia, up through Victoria. I've got one from there. Got wherever I could pick up a strategic plan. I picked up 5 or 6 strategic plans up the East Coast, and I wanted to see what other organisations have put into this strategic plan. I can categorise it into 3 things, because they were in my strategic plan. And it made me think, why is my strategic plan very similar to everyone, well, to the ones I picked on the East Coast? And we're talking about aged care facilities and community organisations. We had 3 things. We're going to be consumer directed or person centred if you're a community organisation. We're going to work with our staff and they're going to be consumer directed or person centred. And the third one is we're going to have systems that work. Nope. It got me thinking about where does that come from? And I went back to government policy and I went, oh, it's there. So all we've done to a large extent, and I know this is going to rattle some cages here, is that we've reiterated government policy into our strategic plan and not really looked at our strategic direction that our organisations have to follow to deliver what is government policy. And that's where we've got to go back and say, well, there's 2 different things, strategic plans, strategic directions. What does my organisation need to look like in 5 or 6 years' time that we can deliver the policy, because we're all going to do the same thing. We know we need to deliver consumer-directed care because we're not going to get any money if we don't. So, and it's in those plans all the way up the coast that I had a look at. So that's where we've got to go back to the drawing board. Each organisation has to look at what their niche is. We mentioned that, Justin mentioned that. We've got to look at our niche, how we're going to deliver those things, and look at the organisation and say, well, we need a strategic business plan to deliver that because we're all going to do the same thing, largely.
Hi, I'm Matthew Gillett from the Health and Community Services Workforce Council in Queensland, and I'm just interested in the data we saw earlier. There's very low scores across the board for workforce planning, and I think you can see in the data that followed that there was quite an effort on obviously the strategic response that you were just talking about, but not the same. Only 13% of the Taylor grants focused on workforce planning, and given that there's very few other sources of funds to support that kind of work, and this being very much a workforce project, I'm curious to know how when the timing might improve for organisations to be ready to do workforce planning, how we might support that effort a little bit more strategically.
I think that will fall out of the strategic plan. So I think the strategic plan's been prioritised and the workforce plan falls out of that. So also with when the girls spoke when they were up here before about the timing of everything and the pressure points and and so really for the organisations who had to prioritise where they want to spend these grants and do whatever, I think strategic planning was the stuff that really we need to know where we're going before we plan the things that fall out of that.
I think you need to be careful that you don't overcomplicate workforce planning. Okay, there's certainly a logical extension out of your strategic plan all the way down. But for organisations that don't have a strategic plan or it's out of date or they are currently under review, you go and talk to their frontline managers. They're doing workforce planning every day. They know what they need, they know how to get it, they know their problems, they know their pain points. If you go and Google any book on workforce planning, the number one thing they'll tell you is they'll give you a framework and then you look at the case studies and they will say, number 1, just start. Okay? Just start. Start with your pain points. Are they RNs? Are they allied health? Are they a shortage of staff? Just start somewhere and try something. Okay. Then put it into a framework. Okay. So don't get hung up on funds and programs. Just have a go.
Thank you. I think that pretty much brings us to the end of our time. Is there any final comment anyone on the panel would like to make, or was there a question you were dying to answer but nobody asked?
Sorry, mate. I was just going to say, I'm not sure where this is going to go with the wind project. I think, and I don't know whether other people are going to do that today, but congratulate them on the success of the pilots. I think sitting around the room today, everybody in the room would recognise that what has happened has been successful. And I don't know how or what the budget's going to bring, whether it's going to be extended or whether it's not, but I would encourage everybody to talk to the people that they think can influence that this does get extended.
Last thing I was just going to add was someone said to me the other day that aged care, and we're talking about profit, not for profit, that sort of thing, and they liken for profit to a VHS video cassette, not for profit to beta. But he said, in a few years' time, it's all going to be DVD, so it's not going to matter. So don't focus on not-for-profit or for-profit. Focus on DVD and then focus on downloads after that, because that's where we're going to be at. We're not in this space. We've got to be looking there and there, not here.
So this brings us to the conclusion of this forum today. And I'd like to leave you with 5 things. 1, an important fact. 2, a Chinese proverb. 3, a line from a great film. 4, a question. And 5, an aspiration. So the important fact is this, that there are an estimated 6 trillion changes taking place in every cell of your body every second. Your stomach lining changes every 5 days. Your skin renews itself every month. Your liver replaces itself every 6 weeks. And every 3 months, you get a new skeleton. Now, to the naked eye, things look static and constant. But beneath it all, change is constant. By the end of 12 months, 98% of the cells in your body have been exchanged for new ones. So guess what? Change is life. You are changing every moment and you're really good at it, otherwise you wouldn't be alive today. So that's an important fact. Having said that, the changes experienced by aged care can be overwhelming. So I'd like to remind you of a Chinese proverb, that the person who moves mountains begins by carrying away small stones. So if you ever feel it's overwhelming, just focus on the one small stone that you can carry now. And if everyone in this room carries away one small stone, that's already a massive mountain that you've carried. Then if you ever come up against something that you feel you've failed or that hasn't worked the way you've wanted, I invite you to consider that there actually is no such thing as failure. Who saw that wonderful movie some years ago, The Best Exotic Marigold Hotel? Yes, because it relates to aged care. And there is a great line that I've taken away from that movie. And do you remember the young hotel proprietor? Everything was going wrong. And he'd run around and reassure everyone, look, it'll all work out in the end. And if it hasn't worked out, well, it's not the end. So just keep going. The question I'd like to leave you with is to consider Henry Miller's observation that sometimes our destination is not a place, but a new way of seeing things. And the depth of thought that I've seen come out of today and the extent and the variety of work that's happening already tells me that there's a whole lot of widespread mind shift going on and deep thinking. So sometimes perhaps ask yourself the question to empower you to move through something, is it really a new destination that I'm looking for? Or just a different, is there a more empowering way of perceiving this situation? And a little insight that I got today was, I never thought, it was the third video, somebody talked about consumers are actually shopping for care. And I thought to myself, gee, I don't know if Dad would have actually bought me if he had the choice. And finally, and the aspiration I'd like to leave with you is Michelangelo's philosophy, that the greatest risk a person can take is not to aim too high and miss, but to aim too low and hit. So aim high, ask how, and your brain and your collective brains will find a way to get you there. So thank you for the absolutely wonderful, inspiring, far-reaching, forward-thinking work that you're doing. And tough as it might be sometimes, I still think it's a gift that you are doing truly meaningful work that's making a positive difference to absolutely everyone, because aged care affects everyone. So I invite you to celebrate now at the cocktail event taking place in 10 minutes just outside the door. Thank you.